So we have a host of experts here today. My name is Dean Quiambo, and we'll be walking through some of these slides and be taking all of your questions. We do have numerous folks, and I'll let them introduce themselves here.
Where do you want to go? Chris Evers here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining.
We have Vintage Foster from AMF Media Group as well.
Hi, this is Katie Nolan, Director of PR and Content with AMF Media Group.
This is Matt Gard, Audit Partner at Armanino.
Good morning, everyone. Elizabeth Shoemaker, VP of Client Services at AMF Media Group.
All right, and let's see how we can get to some of our content here. Let's get to our next slide. And just a real quick overview for Armanino. As you know, 1,500 people strong. Nonprofit is our largest niche by client count. We're helping organizations in lots of different ways, especially right now through this crisis. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Debbie, Vintage, why don't you introduce the AMF Media Group and what you guys do?
Sure. So AMF Media Group is an advertising and PR firm. It's often a surprise when Armanino clients find out that we have an advertising agency within Armanino. We go to market under a different brand, but the A in AMF stands for Armanino. We have a big practice in the nonprofit space. We work with universities and colleges, private schools, museums, social service-based nonprofits and churches. We, like Armanino, are in all the major markets that Armanino is in: Los Angeles, Dallas, San Francisco, San Jose, and our home office is in San Ramon. But we also have 2 satellite AMF-only offices, one in San Luis Obispo and the other in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is our digital group. And then we also are the author of the 2018 Armanino Nonprofit Donor Study. We're excited to be with you today, and I'll turn it back over to Dean.
Great. Right now, in this crisis, we're hearing organizations and our clients really focusing on 4 key areas, which is number 1, the cash and cash controls of their business as they kind of move forward and navigate these waters, accessing whatever government aid is available, managing through HR and work from home capabilities for their people. And lastly, and really what we want to focus in on today is really those internal and external communication. What are you saying to your constituents, your stakeholders, your clients and customers in today's marketplace? You can go to our COVID-19 Resource Center where we have so much information. It is broken down by industry, and I think the nonprofit practice at Armanino is very proud to say that there is so much content out there right now in which nonprofits can be moving forward in this environment. So our agenda, we're going to talk about why right now might be the right time to fundraise. I know there's lots of different articles out there saying, is this the time to ask? Is it not the time to ask? There are some new tax deductions for donors right now that are available through the new CARES package that we want to highlight. And then again, if you are going to go ahead and make that ask, how do you craft the right message and how do you reach the right audience? I think those 2 are going to be very, very key in what your organization does moving forward. So with that said, let's go to the next slide. All right, Matt, why don't you take it?
Thanks, Dean. And as the true accountant on this call, I'll get to go through some of the tax changes that have been enacted here to help with the crisis that everyone's going through. And so we'll talk about what those changes are and how they incentivize giving at this time. And then we'll start to talk about, well, how can you use that to reach out to your donor base and use that to increase fundraising at this time. So everyone's heard of the CARES Act. A couple of the key provisions that were put in place to incentivize giving at this time. number one is that people who take the standard deduction on their tax return can now donate up to $300 per taxpayer, $600 for couples on their 2020 taxes. I saw an estimate that I think about 85% of total taxpayers are in this boat where they do take the standard deduction. And at this point, prior to this, they would get no deduction for their charitable contribution. Now, under here, you would be able to take up to $300. So again, not big dollars here, but now you're going to be able to reach tens of millions of more people who could potentially take this deduction. And maybe that's a reason that they will give to help. You know, so many people want to help at this time and they can now get a deduction for doing so. Or maybe they'll give more now that they are actually able to deduct some of this on their taxes. The second item is probably more so for some of the wealthier donors that you may have that are itemizing the deductions, but the change here is that they previously were only able to take deductions for 60% of their adjusted gross income. That has now been increased to 100%. So you get that full tax deduction. So for example, you know, if you have a donor who has an adjusted gross income of $100,000 and they want to contribute $100,000, previously they would have only been able to deduct $60,000 of that. Now they get the full $100,000. So, you know, that's a pretty significant impact. And so more donors may be willing to give more because they'll be able to pay less taxes as a result and help during this time. The last one relates to corporate donors. So a number of the nonprofits on this call may get donations from corporate donors. And under the new provisions here, they're able to increase their tax deduction for any corporate donations made. It was previously only 10% of taxable income, it's now increased to 25%. So again, a sizable way for corporate donors to potentially reduce their taxes. One other thing on here, and it's not listed separately, but you may be a nonprofit that gets donations of food. And if there are corporate donors that do give food donations, they previously were only able to deduct 15% of their up to their taxable income of those donations. That is also increased to 25%. So again, some sizable new deductions here for our corporate donors as well. And so now we'll move on to, well, how can we educate our donor base and how can we potentially take advantage of these new incentives for giving? So with that, I will turn it over to Katie.
Yes, hi everyone. So some good news. There was a recent study by Fidelity Charitable in March that found that there is some good momentum among donors, with the majority planning to at minimum maintain their donations in response to COVID-19, but 25% actually planning to increase. And among those, millennials were the largest group that said that they were planning to give more in response to the pandemic. It's also important to note that this is not just for health organizations. Actually, half of all donors are concerned and plan to give to organizations that are non-health related, with 25% saying that they plan to really diversify their giving as a result of the pandemic because they are recognizing that there is tremendous need, especially at this time.
And Katie, I mean, when you see that 46% of millennials will give more, to me, that says that we're going to see higher volume of donations, but maybe, you know, not the traditional really large amounts, but how can you go out there and get lots and lots and lots of volume rather than the really, really big dollars, right?
Definitely. And so as we go into further into this presentation on the next slide, we'll start to talk about what your message really should be to reach these this large percentage of donors that plan to give more right now. And then as we transition even further, how do you really reach them? How do you reach the people that may not give in large chunks, but you'll get many, many more donors? So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. So what's the win for you, really? We kind of just mentioned it, but organizations that place a really compelling message and also in front of the really the exact right audience, which we'll tell you a little bit more about, are going to see an increase in giving. When it comes to your message, there's really three things that are important at all times, but especially right now. The first one is educate. Who you are, what is your mission, and what is the value that you bring. Also, think about how you're adapting and how you're pivoting your organization during this time in this crisis, and show how you're continuing to service your communities, even though that might look a little bit differently right now. The second item to focus on for getting your message right is why now? What is your specific circumstance with COVID-19? What is the need? How has that need changed? Really tell that story, not only that you're continuing to serve your communities, but how you've noticed that there is so much more of a need at this time. And lastly, capture attention. Really good quality creative speaks volumes. Just having really nice creative messaging that captures attention. And we'll go into that a little bit further in the next slide. I'll turn it over to Elizabeth and Chris to talk more about that.
Great, thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. Just sort of on Katie's last point about attention and how this starts moving into the message and creative. One of the things that we've noticed in the ad industry is a real avoidance with companies trying to block or what's called blacklisting content related to anything to do with the pandemic. Remember that the types of sites, these are high brand value, tier 1 news oriented sites where people are going for really quick, up-to-date information and trying to stay educated. This may not be the ideal place to start removing or blocking that content. So again, getting that message out in the right time and right place, there's a lot of news volume that's being aggregated. There's a great time to try and align with some of those big brands. So I think, Elizabeth, do you want to talk on some of the next points?
Absolutely. I think as Katie both, we're really talking about what that message is. And I think one of the most important things is to ensure that you keep that message really, really true to the brand. Who you are, how you communicate to your donors, how do you want to communicate what's happening right now and how it's meaningful to you, and then just really move that message forward to make sure that there's a benefit for the recipient. So when we're talking today, you're going to hear a lot about who's the audience, what are the channels you're going to deliver that to those audiences, and then what's that key message. So it's really about being empathetic and true to yourself to ensure that the message is clear and communicated, and that it's not coming from a different place than they're used to hearing when it comes to who you are as a nonprofit and how you communicate to your existing audiences. So keep it simple, pretty straightforward, and make sure that you're communicating the benefits and how it makes sense for who you are as a nonprofit, but more importantly, how can they help you be successful?
Okay, so we'll get sort of into the start of now, how do we begin to put these things together? When we want to reach audiences, one of the key things on the alignment, not every nonprofit is going to need to reach the same audiences, and getting more and more unique is really where data focused and programmatic digital solutions come in. It helps us be scaled in market, but to the right people that need to see our message based on what our brand goals are. The older format of what we used to call spray and pray, you know, I would buy large ads in papers and TV, and I'm trying to reach a very wide audience, hoping that some of those audiences that I need to appeal to are within that group. Now we're moving to very, very refined focus and trying to really drive home the fact that we are going to resonate with certain groups, and that's going to be an advantage in how we're going to spend our marketing dollars. So if we move into the next slide, start talking about how that happens a little bit. For those of you that may not be familiar with the term programmatic, this is basically programming data and objectives into a machine that helps us really analyze data in vast amounts of time, 10, 100,000 decisioning points that could happen where a human might be able to do 3 or 4. So we start by using your existing customer data. You know, who are the people that you believe are regular contributors or donators? Who are those most likely to purchase from you based on your history? If you have database information or customer lists, we can embed all of that information into this data focused machine. And that really starts to help us find new customers in really, really efficient ways I'm going to speak about in the next few slides. Where we're trying to get to ultimately is old fashioned, you know, when we used to sell advertising, it was constantly coming back to the well every time we saw some level of success. When programmatic and data focused marketing is really doing its job, your advertising spend can actually remain quite flat you start to see your performance, the number of donors start to increase, but your cost per each acquisition, or the amount of the marketing cost to drive a lead, begins to decrease. That's the ultimate goal of how the data can start to work. Now, how do we do this? There's usually four key steps in any programmatic data campaign. Number one is prospecting. This is your traditional, let's go to market, find audiences that we feel are the best fit based on that starting point of data that we think should be seeing the message. But then we start to watch, and we're learning and optimizing through this data management process. Who are responding to what ads, what sites, as it says here, the devices, in which markets, time of day, hundreds and hundreds of data elements. And then we immediately begin to start optimizing these campaigns in real time. In live action, we start to say, this ad should go to this person and not to that person, because it's more likely we're going to see a response. Now we start bringing people into your website. And again, we begin to monitor what's happening on that level. People that get to your site, but maybe get to your donation page, but don't follow through and make an actual commitment, there could be a reason why. In some cases, as we know from research, it can take people 2 to 3 weeks to make a final decision on where they're going to put those donating dollars. And we can be communicating with them along that path in very timely placed messages as reminders to bring them back. And once we start to build that data, there could be a component, depending on your need, to target specific locations. This is a challenge currently, of course, with everybody at home. But we could have information on where people were in the past that gives us really strong insights to the type of audience we want to talk to today. And 42%, digital our dollars are being shifted from trade show and event and location-based marketing to digital assets. How do we do this? I'll use a very quick example. Let's say that you operate a nonprofit symphony, and of course you can't have live shows. There's no audiences in the seats where that could be part of the fundraising effort. I can say, let's go back in time 1, 2, 3 years and look at all the venues where your concert may have been held, and start to say, okay, here's the devices that were in those locations, in those concert halls. I can aggregate that data. I can put it into a bucket, like an audience targeting bucket, and say, here's another component of how we can target people based on where they were, knowing that they fit the need to say, we need some funding for our symphony, we're in trouble. And once all that's aggregated, now we have conversion data that we're watching off your site. People that start to come in are actually filling out those donation forms and adding dollars. We can model that information to say, here's the types of consumers that are coming in and converting. These are the consumers that we can now identify out on the world of the internet that have never been to your site before, but their profiles look extremely similar to those customers that you already have and those that we're aggregating through these digital campaign tactics. Now we can go back to market, talk to those people, but we're scaling the marketing based on the data that we have of your existing customers. And that becomes
a couple questions. That have come in real quick, and we want to make this as conversational as much as possible. But
sure.
Can nonprofits use their existing platforms that they might have right now to do such targeted campaigns? Can you give any insight into that, or do they need to go purchase new software or give us some insight into that?
There's a few ways you can do. The standard way is saying, I have an email list. Let me email the people that are in my email database and say, hey, you know what, we've got these challenges, we're looking for your help. You could have existing audiences on your social profile pages, for example, your Facebook page and whatnot, where you're going to put out those types of content. The solutions that we use is it's what's known as a data management platform. So it's a comprehensive system that's aggregating all of these different touch points, your email list, your CRM data, your social media information, and then placing these on, say, display ads in content sites and websites and apps, driving these people all back into your site where we're capturing that data at the bottom. And is that helping that with the question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And then what about, Chris, what about, a lot of people have people that have attended, or they have relationships with different donors, whether they've attended their gala or something that they've done in the past. How does, this targeting that you're speaking about, how does that work towards staying in touch with those donors that might have attended an event in the past or given in the past? Can you give some insight there?
Yeah, I'll grab my phone here. So today, the general trend is about 75, 85% of anywhere you go with this phone in your pocket, it's going to be activated, whether it's location services, so you could have used your Google Maps to get to that event. But then what happens is you are in a physical location, let's say it's latitude, longitude, and we can then capture the device ID of this phone that was in that event. Now I have that information that I'm storing from a data service provider, weeks, months, days later, whatever the requirement is. We can now aggregate all that information to say, well, these people were at that event that we hosted 8 weeks ago. We want to reconnect with them. Well, now what we can do is start sending them targeted ads back to this phone when they're on an app, a mobile website. And then I can begin to pair the data from this phone, which is active in my home Wi-Fi and my IP address, to the MacBook that I'm reading right now. And suddenly these two devices are paired to the same user. I can now start to find ways of sending targeted messages to that desktop process as well. And so we're really trying to say, where were you before and what were you doing, where I can build all this data together and provide a model to be able to communicate back. So,
Chris, let me jump in because I think a part of that question we may not have answered. If you're a smaller organization with a limited reach, so for instance, we have a campaign launching today with a local church. It's a pretty big church, but what we figured is that that church is going to go about 12 to 15 miles outside of its radius before it starts to bump into other churches and their fundraising efforts. So in their case, we were able to partner with them to deliver a campaign that was specific to their membership, their previous attendees who filled out any sort of information cards, anyone who's gone to their Bible studies or any of their outreach events. And they also have a nonprofit component, their own separate 501c3 that is specific to meeting the needs of folks who are homeless and or in need of sustenance and food and shelter. And so with that group, there was not an actual digital buy. There was an execution within their normal ecosystem. And I can tell you they're already net ahead.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. There's lots of ways to coordinate. Like once you have the data and you can start to understand who those audiences are and what they're doing, you may have a preference of doing direct mail plus e-blasts and whatnot. So you can start to connect all these points to really help identify where are those prime audiences found that are connecting and resonating, and then using that data to go back to the market and find more of them and really ramp up that whole system. So it really depends. And going back, just I know in terms of, do I need to purchase a system to do this or buy a system to do this? Can I use my own? A lot of times if we're involved, we can audit the current process and figure out what's working, what's not. Can we tweak this? Can we add our solutions on top? Can we help you redefine how you're working with your existing systems to make them more efficient? So hope that helps. I think we can move ahead another slide. And just going to finish off quickly with a short case study, but this was a program that we ran in Mayne Island. This is southern tip of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, just north of Seattle. And it was a purchase of a 26 hectare parcel of land in the Capital Regional District. The challenge was to come up with the $7 million that were needed to purchase this land, and the marketing basically stalled at $3 million. So when we started to employ these data-focused solutions, the audiences that we wanted to speak to were philanthropists, environmentalists, animal activists, conservative type people, and to say, hey, you're within this region, or you've been in the park land before, you're now located elsewhere, but we want to have a connection with you to help raise these funds. We supported these programmatic display ads with YouTube and social media. And we targeted people within British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. Main goal is a video message was created on the benefit to the consumer of keeping this park space available to them. and having them watch this. And the net result over 3 months was the additional $4 million was raised. So talking to people that were very closely aligned with the need, finding the right way to connect with those people across a variety of tactics. There's a lot of different things on the internet we can do today, but using the strategy and the messaging to say, this is the cause, the reason, here's the net result of what we're trying to raise, and that consumer goal was met. And I think that might be it for me. If we slide ahead one more and have some questions, I believe.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do was to keep this presentation short, because at the end of the day, we wanted to be able to answer your questions and address the needs and really make this kind of a two-way conversation. So I'm going to ask Dean. I think, Dean, you have...
Yeah, we have a couple questions, Vintage, and people, feel free to start letting us know what you have now. Vintage, what about the concern about asking right now? Is there any concern that this could backfire on our organization and trying to come off as opportunistic or anything like that?
It's a fair question, and I would say I don't think you should be concerned about that. I mean, what we're seeing is that the federal government has recognized that all businesses, and especially nonprofits, are going to be in a difficult situation. So the federal government has changed the rules on giving. They have said, this is what needs to happen to fill the gap. I would say, and I don't mean to be insensitive in any form or fashion, but if you don't ask, shame on you. The rules have changed so that you can ask. The rules have changed so that you can have increased funds. The example I like to use, Dean, is you take a person who, let's say, makes $100,000 a year. And that in some parts of the country, that's a great income. In some parts of the country, that's a moderate income. But let's take that same person and say that they had a parent, or their parents passed along wealth to them, and they're sitting on $2-3 million. They could not give money to their favorite charity and meet a need and get the tax deduction. Well, the whole United States, and I would say world, has a predisposition to filling the gap if they have the means to do so. So I would unapologetically say, here's our need, here's what we're going to do with the funds, here's how we are going to benefit those that we serve, and this is your role in having impact. I would not for a second delay on the ask.
Well, Vintage, I mean, that pulls up our next question, which is, if the predisposition of our country is to rush and help, how does one, stand out in a very crowded space where lots of nonprofits are asking? I mean, you see all over the news, whether it's lines at different social service organizations, that you hear stories of nonprofits that need help today. How does one stand out?
Well, I'll start the answer, but I'm going to hand off to Elizabeth and to Chris. At the end of the day, nonprofits have a value proposition. They exist and have existed because they meet a need. I love what Elizabeth said, because it's on point. Don't venture outside of your brand. Stay true to your brand and make sure you're investing in the best creative you can, because it is going to be a crowded space. So the 1-2 punch is stay true to the brand, but now more than ever, have great creative, great writing, great content, because there is going to be a flood. And the last point, which is what Chris is saying, and this is not a shotgun approach. This is a rifle approach.
Yeah, I'll jump in, I guess, Elizabeth, if I may. The rifle approach, yeah, it's taking that concept, but then saying, how can I find many targets as opposed to maybe just one? And we use that data and that profiling to then scale that need. There's a question that's come in about being a performing arts organization with a gallery or a facility, and what are we doing? Like it's not open. So again, not everyone in the market is going to be interested necessarily in performing arts, but going back in time, analyzing who was at that location, who were at other performing art locations, and what types of audience profile information can we build from that set now allows us to have more of a targeted approach in talking to people that are performing arts enthusiasts. Then we work on a strategy to say, well, what is the message that we need to be communicating right now? We're talking about now booking events or shows could be months into the future, but we need the support today to make that happen. Well, that becomes part of the messaging that we could possibly be using with those particular consumers. It could be the investors or the donators that are going to be motivated to ensure that when we come out of this current situation, whatever that looks like, that we're still going to be able to be human and do the things that we like to do, but crafting that message and finding those audience groups that are going to resonate is really what we try to achieve with our clients.
Chris, can I piggyback that? Because I have a lot of, I've sat on, I think, 3 symphony boards. I can't remember how many theater boards, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about the part of the community that experiences the high end of the arts, of symphonies, not necessarily museums, but museums too, really that donor pool donates because they believe the arts make our world a better place.
Absolutely.
I would say to you that you have a fantastic argument right now to say when we come out of this, the ability to again interact with our arts, to the music, paint, the museums, the ability to participate as a community and all that is beautiful is going to be more important coming out of this than before. And if your donor has a predisposition to that belief and has given, the data that I'm familiar with also says that is the higher income level of our community. It's the top 2 and 3%. They now have a greater incentive or bigger deduction opportunities than they did in the past. So I would actually say that from an arts perspective, you actually have that smaller donor pool, but they have greater incentive and greater deductions. There's an organization in San Francisco, many of you probably are familiar with it, called Glide Memorial. One of the best organizations in San Francisco and the Bay Area around feeding the homeless and caring for the disenfranchised. That is an organization where you might have a greater reach. You might, and millennials would be fantastic for that. So again, back to the original point, your organization exists because you feel a need. Donor pools are going to be slightly different, but for the arts, that donor pool has deeper pockets and they have a belief in your organization and what your organization means to the larger community. You take a Glide Memorial and we have an immediate need. We're providing shelter, we're providing food, we're keeping people from dying, and that's a quick hit. And it may not be deeper pockets, although I would argue Glide Memorial is both. But do not back off of your value proposition and step up your call to action because the need is greater.
Vintage and team, we have a question here about the altruistic or ethical side of this right now, and it's investing in fundraising efforts right now when we know that layoffs and furloughs are very real in lots of nonprofit sectors. How do we navigate this balance, and how do we work with our board to kind of tell the story and answer this question? And Vintage, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'll take this as well. At the end of the day, it's the same point, Dean. We exist for a reason. We feel a significant need, and it's a numbers game. If you don't ask, then you're shorting yourself the funding. And I would say you're looking at either more layoffs within your organization, or you are decreasing the number of people you can reach and help, or the level or quantity of services you are going to provide. So yes, it is a very awkward situation to be in. And we have a nonprofit we're working with here in the Bay Area, and they're about to spend $38,000 on an ad buy to generate revenue. They just furloughed, they cut their salaries by 10%, and they had some furloughed. And the leader of the organization was in the same place. How do I look at my folks and say, we're going to market with this initiative while we're seeing people take 10% cuts and some furloughs? And the answer was, it's really simple. Don't do it and your revenue is going to continue to go. Do it and you're going to see increased revenue, and you're going to get back to taking those employees to whole, whole as in their salary, and you're going to be able to continue to either maintain services or grow the services. But it is the awkward position that leaders of nonprofits and companies, quite frankly, find themselves in, but it's a necessary decision, and it's the best decision on behalf of your organization.
Vintage, we have another question here with regards to social media and this digital targeted approach. Can you talk about how these intersect and work together?
Well, I could, but I wouldn't know as much as Katie and Chris, so I'm going to punt and let the experts talk about that.
So in general, social media can and really should be a key component of your outreach. We've talked about kind of depending on how large your pool is, how many you're trying to reach. You could use direct mail, your email, social media. I know most of you are probably familiar with Giving Tuesday, highly effective organization that has a highly effective social media campaign that's actually doing a Giving Tuesday now on May 5th in response to COVID-19. But we would say that is going to be probably a big push and a big rush for a lot of calls for donations. So we would really encourage you to prepare your messaging and start your outreach now to really get ahead of that. And then in terms of using social media to kind of be more specifically targeted, I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything more to that.
Yeah, for sure. The blending of all of these tactics is a really strategic approach overall. It's trying to figure out what message I need to put out. How is that going to be a different message in social media? And then social media, it's a different message in LinkedIn than it might be on Twitter than Facebook. But that strategy is still the same. What is the end result that we're trying to achieve? The data on Facebook, for instance, can also be grabbed and utilized into a display campaign. So the type of information that we can pick up about certain audiences off your Facebook profile gives us additional insights into who we may want to communicate with in a display ad or targeting mobile apps and this type of thing. So it's really blending all of these capabilities and platforms together and resolving back to that message strategy that really is where it should begin. So,
Katie and Chris, here's another question that kind of piggybacks on social media and targeted campaigns. What is the timeline that we need to get ahead of something like this till we can start to see some kind of results when we do this? And what type of investment, are people looking at?
Yeah, it's a really great question. A lot of times, some of the first approaches that we might take once we have an idea of the goals and the objectives, what is the market that we're speaking to? How big is that market? How many locations might there be for the facility, for instance? And what do we need to do to be reasonable in terms of the scale? And a lot of the insights that we can pull from these data systems today will tell us, here's the exact number of availability in that market. What percentage do you want to go after? And then we can start to craft some performance. The timelines, it's not unheard of that we do get wins quite quickly, immediately. The longer term approach is in aggregating all of this information on your own business and being able to use that for that efficiency market method I was talking about in the beginning, where the performance is increasing and the cost per acquisition is decreasing, ultimately depends on the need right now. Is this something that we can take the current scenario where we have a lot of people at home and a lot of people are looking for information? I refer back to the Vintage's point on performance crowds and whatnot, and watching musicians and artists. This could be a time where if my orchestra is not playing live and I'm losing sponsorship dollars because I don't have any bums and seats, well, maybe it's more of an altruistic approach. Maybe we're saying right now, let's take the time to introduce the band members. The guitarist could offer 5 free sessions to the audience on how to pick up guitar. A trumpeter could do the same thing. A performing artist or a dancer could give some top 5 dance tips to practice at home. But these are all messages crafted with the end goal of saying, you've now met the players in the orchestra. Well, here's a great reason to come back and see them once this is starting. And you're building that momentum right now. But again, if it's an immediate need, it's really sitting down and figuring out what that need is. Where are those audiences that we can find them? And what is that message that's going to hopefully resonate with them right now? I know it's a bit of a longer answer than, how long does this take? But it really boils down to what is the specific goal and objective of each specific nonprofit entity that we might be helping out. So.
Got it. With regards to more specifics, I mean, we know, unfortunately, with the current pandemic that, visitor-based attractions, ticket-based attractions, organizations like the theaters and performing arts that rely on lots of people coming together and enjoying that art, they're hit really hard right now. Is there any kind of suggestions with regards to theater, museums, et cetera, about talking to their database right now and trying to replace maybe those ticket sale dollars with donations? Is that a strategy, and can that be targeted?
Yeah,
So, Dean, I think that's an excellent idea. I mean, Chris, I'll take the first part of this. I mentioned, and I apologize to all the other arts organizations because we keep going back to the symphony as the example. But I'll say this. I've, in 3 different cities had symphony tickets and a subscription, I should say. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of folks use those tickets about 40–50% of the time, and then they're giving those tickets away. Not because they don't want to be at the symphony, but what happens, and there's somebody on here who's probably part of the symphony who's going to school me later, but you got the pops and you got the classical. I tend to love the pops. Classical, I kind of pick and choose. But because I have that connection with the symphony, I'm buying both. And I'm giving some of my classical tickets away to folks that I know enjoy that. But here's the key. I have that connection. I feel that obligation to fund and support the symphony, even though the classical side isn't my thing. And so if you have that connection, if you have that commitment, I am very much willing to support that because I enjoy that organization and I want to see it thrive and come out the other side of this.
Yeah, that's pretty close to what I was going to say, Vintage. Bigger picture, I would say, what can I do right now to maybe keep some of that momentum going? The artists that are out there right now are offering free Facebook Live concerts. There may be a concert that was filmed or videoed several years ago. We could create that on its own YouTube channel. We could email and communicate with all the previous ticket buyers and those that are on the newsletter lists and fans of that particular performing arts group, and say, hey, you know what, on Tuesday night at 8:00, we're going to run this on YouTube or our Facebook page, and we'd like to invite you to come watch a concert that we put on. That may have had 1,000 people in an auditorium, and suddenly we might be able to scale and have 50,000 people come and watch this concert. I know the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra has done this a couple of times in Vancouver, saying, we're in trouble right now. We don't have any funds coming in to support this group. And, if you like the video, it's kind of like the old, the PBS public broadcast channel. If you like what you just saw, we'd love it if you could donate just a couple of dollars to help us continue through this. I don't think that asking your fans that love these types of events is a bad thing. I think everybody understands that there's some trouble, and how can we mitigate this so that these resources are there when we come out of this scenario? So.
Yeah, let me piggyback on that, but I want to ask a question I see that's coming up, and I know we only have about 15 more minutes, so I want to answer that question. But just remember, and this is preaching to the choir, for arts organizations that have a ticket-based or subscription-based revenue model, your relationship is far different than the for-profit world. If Janet Jackson has to cancel a concert because she has the flu, you're going to refund those tickets, or you're going to reschedule. But my commitment to the museum, the symphony, the theater is different than, and my relationship is different than that with Janet Jackson. As much as I'd like to know Janet Jackson, I don't think she has much interest in knowing me. But you have that kind of relationship. It's we are in this together. We are collectively bringing this form of the arts to the marketplace. And so I think you have a lot more leeway to ask for, not only can we hold on to that money for that ticket for that event that did not happen, but can we A, hold that event later, and B, while we're talking to you, we have some real needs. But the question that's coming in that I want to get to, Dean, is on the smaller side, somebody sent me a note about cost. With that church, that was about a $5,000 expense because there was no buy. So you can get out of the door if you're looking at, well, let me say it this way. You could do it on your own, period, with the advice you're hearing today. If you felt like you didn't have the skill set inside your organization to execute this quickly and with great quality, you could get out the door to your own database for as little as $5,000 with someone like us. Now, for the larger organizations and what Chris is talking about, where you're going out and really using programmatic, that's going to cost you probably, Chris, you could give a range, but I don't want folks to get off this call and think, well, we got to spend a lot of money to do this, or even we have to hire AMF to do it. Many of you have the skill set in-house. The question is, can you do it, and can you do it quickly? Because if ever, this now is a representation of time is of the essence, because there are going to be folks, if they're not already in front of you. The best example I've seen is Mount Sinai. And I'm sure many of you have seen those spots. Those spots started running a week ago. And it's a great example of saying, here's the need, here's why. But this doesn't have to break the bank for you to get out the door. Chris?
Yeah, I'm saying it would go back to what's the objective, the needs, and the market size. But yeah, I wouldn't want to scare anyone away thinking that programmatic, it sounds like this big fancy term. If you're not familiar with it, it's based on efficiency. So how can I reach audiences with very insightful capabilities that allow me to reach the right audiences at the right time, regardless of their device, and not have to think about this as an incredibly expensive ordeal. We run campaigns in some markets, small markets, it could be a few $1,000s. National campaigns, we've replaced $3 million newspaper and radio buys with a $300,000 programmatic buy and outperform the radio and TV combined. It really depends on the scale that you're trying to operate on, but those become part of the questions that we start with to say, where are you? What are our resources? What are you trying to achieve, and how can we help? So,
another pain of the timing of this pandemic has been the fact that it happened in the spring. And we know so many spring fundraisers and galas and events happen right now. And the nonprofits are trying to, find a way to still bring in those dollars. Have any insight on nonprofits that are kind of moving those galas to virtual type of events? And is there any success with that? Any best practice on that right now?
So the truth of the matter is, Dean, this is an example of you picked the mechanism, building the plane while we're flying, driving the truck as it's being built. We at AMF have done many virtual events. In fact, we produced a major virtual event each quarter for Armanino with all of its, 13, 14 offices. We are seeing organizations move to these virtual events. It's easy to produce a fundraising component adjacent to it. It's going to come down to the technical expertise for handling the volume of folks who will tune into those events. And so at the end of the day, I would say two things. One, if you have that technical expertise in-house, I think it's a wonderful idea, and attach to it a funding, an ask, a fundraising component. If you do not have that technical expertise, do not try it on your own, whether it's us or someone else. Pay a third party, because this is your opportunity. And if you blow it and the technology breaks down, it's going to be a tough thing to overcome. But I love the idea, and yes, we're seeing it, and yes, we're producing some of it. But to say we have a lot of experience at it would be a stretch, because this is new to the game.
That's right. That's right. Vintage and Chris and team, what about, in the big picture, and nobody knows how long our current situation of quarantine is going to last. Do we see this as a series of asks? Do we see this as a one-time thing? In the big picture, how do we see this kind of evolving over the next, 4, 6, 8 weeks, or however long this goes? In the new normal of social distancing, they're saying things like, this could extend well into the fall for some large venues. What are our thoughts on that?
Chris, why don't you start with walking through the series, and then I'll talk about the life of campaigns.
Yeah, I'm a little biased on the digital side, but I like the opportunity that you can consistently place messages in front of the right audiences at well-defined times. It's why they really work well. I know that consistency helps build brand, but we can do it in a way that's non-intrusive, using display ads on content sites and whatnot, where you're not really in someone's face, but these are reminder opportunities that if the message is crafted really well, you can find some engagement. Long term, the more data, the more information that we're building, when we're, sort of back to normal, you can really start to apply that information to some really efficient means. So.
Well, and Chris, that kind of just reminds me that I feel like in so many ways, some of the things that happened before all of this and some of the things that happen after, we're not going back, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to learn new things. This is a giant petri dish, and organizations are going to learn new things of what they could do going forward. Do we feel like digital, strategic, targeted marketing is something that's going to be here to stay moving forward?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge point. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, Dean, but the shift in things like YouTube engagement, connected TV or internet TV, for those of you that have watched Hulu, Netflix, Roku, Disney Plus, these things have exploded. Percentages of 200% increased downloads and user engagement time over just several weeks ago. This has really opened the eyes to people that, hey, you know what? Content can be consumed when I want it, how I want it. Internet sites have gone up 30-40% in overall traffic. This has really been that kick in the pants of, when is that shift going to happen to a truly digital first economy? That's where I'm seeing it now. Everybody is forced to bank online, grocery shop online. I've purchased some wine online recently. And I mean, these are flawless systems now. They are very easy to use and they work really, really well. What does that mean for the future? hundreds of thousands of businesses have just armed their employees with laptops, support for internet bandwidth at home, video monitor systems, Zoom, and all this type of stuff is re-educating us on how we go about our daily lives. That has to be thought of in the next months ahead of how are we going to change our communication structure. So yeah, great point, Dean.
In Vintage, did we want to talk about just the longer term, ask and the vision of the bigger picture here as well? Maybe just.
Yeah, thank you for that. I realize I missed my cue, Dean. I'm getting a ton of questions that are coming right at me, and I was typing an answer offline and missed my cue. I apologize to everyone. And I apologize for the folks I haven't sit and answered back yet. I will as we catch up. But here's the thing. Don't think of this as a one and done. Your circumstances are going to change. Your windows of opportunity are going to change. So where we find ourselves as an organization in 3 months may be different than where we are now. So I would look at these as campaigns that are seasonal, meaning 2-3 months, and then I would regroup from there and find out where I'm at, and I would move from there.
Well, outstanding. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. We are right up against it here. To any of the questions that we did not get to, we'll reach out to you individually. We'd love to talk to you and talk more about your individual needs and thoughts and questions. We'll circle back with everyone. Unless there's any closing points that Chris and team and Vintage, Katie, that you guys wanted to share. Is there any closing comments here? I feel like it's a great opportunity and something that, there is a need and there is competition. So something to think about for all of our nonprofits as they move forward.
Yeah, I'd say 2 things on behalf of AMF. First, thank you for tuning in. And I really want to encourage you, whether you partner with us or someone else, get to market, get your message out, explain your value and your specific need and how those folks can those donors can have impact. And then the second thing, Dean, is we're getting a lot of questions and we're not keeping up. Are we going to provide contact information? Because I think Elizabeth, Chris, and Katie should, their contact information. Oh, it's mine. Okay, if you send me an email and we didn't get to you and you have needs, I'll either answer or I will get it to Elizabeth, Katie, or Chris. And again, regardless of whether you use us or not, we will be helpful to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are definitely here to serve the nonprofit community. We believe in your future. We believe in your mission. We're here to help no matter what. And please feel free to reach out and we'll circle back. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend. And we can do this together. Thank you.